looks like it's working. Alright, cool. So, we're back. I did this one time before, and we'll see how this goes again. Hopefully, people actually find this live stream. So, the goal here is to really just talk about whatever. And as you see by the name of the stream, it's just answering questions. So, I didn't specify exactly what kind of questions because there's so many different things that I'm interested in talking about. So, I will get into some preliminary things because I don't have any comments or any suggestions for any topics. So, I'll just go through some of the things that I've been reading about and looking at. So, that's basically the gist for today. The main goal is just for me to actually follow through and create content in whatever way I can do that. So, anyway, we'll see where we go with today. So, I have Logos Bible software open where I've been reading St. Augustine's City of God. It's really just a comprehensive work. He touches on so many different things. Sometimes you get lost. Like right now, he's talking about time again, which is like one of his favorite subjects to talk about, and he really dives in deeply into questions of time, which is not easy to understand. And there's actually a famous, like a part of City of God where he talks about, or not City of God, the Confessions, where he talks about time and how it's when you ask what is time, it things get complicated. I don't remember the exact quote. I can probably find it. But anyway, he does like talking about that, and it's quite an interesting section in City of God right now. It's funny, he already addressed this question of when the angels were created, but now he's revisiting it again because he can't help himself. So it's funny, he goes back to the same things many times, and like I said, it's very comprehensive. So what I mean by that is he touches on so many different things, and he's really just a brilliant guy, and no wonder everyone loves him as one of the church fathers. It's just he's just brilliant, and he touches on so many different things. And so, without further ado, let's just go into what I've been reading, just instead of just talking forever about preliminary things. Okay, it looks like the stream health is fine, so I didn't lose you guys. I mean, you guys. Nobody's there, but anyway. Alright, so, City of God, chapter... The way that the book is set up is books and chapters. So, a book is what we would typically look at as a chapter. That's the kind of size that we're looking at of a book. And so, the work of City of God, it's got 22 books or something like that, and so we're about halfway through it. I'm reading it with somebody, so we are going through it together. And so right now we're actually on the second half of the work where he actually talks more about the City of God. So the first couple of chapters are talking about the current situation in Rome, and he's been talking about the different understanding of the angels and the spiritual realm in God. And so he's really been getting into the details of the philosophy of his day as well as the religion, and poking holes in it and showing that it is largely about the pride of man. The elevation of the pride of man is kind of the beginning part, and him showing that the philosophies of his day as well as the religion are man-made and are meant to elevate human beings in a prideful way. So then the second half of the work is him actually getting into the history of the city of God and the city of man. So the city of man is the man elevating himself in a prideful way, as well as the demons too. And then the city of God is those that are humble before God. And so he's getting into, right now, the origin of the two cities, the city of God and the city of man. And so he kind of goes into the fall of the angels, the separation of the angels and the demons. And now he's getting into questions about when the human beings were made as well as angels. Like I said, he revisited the same theme again, so to some degree he is repeating himself in this chapter, this book. Okay, and then the chapters are like paragraphs. Sections, they're not exactly paragraphs, they're a little bit longer. But anyway, so let's get into some of the things here that I found interesting. I can actually pull up my notes on the right. So let me do that. Sometimes when I'm talking, I forget how to do things. Anyway, okay, let's do only city of God. And then I'll get to the chapter, the book 12 notes. I mean, we could get through a lot of different notes from the first couple of chapters too, but books. I keep saying chapters. I know, it's confusing. Well, anyway. So, we'll just go through a couple of things from chapter... book 12. Alright. Can you show me this? Yeah, there we go. Alright. Now, I'll change the source so that you can actually see it. Let's see. I had Obsidian open earlier, so that's why that's blank. It was a different window. Okay. And Obsidian is a note-taking program. Well, anyway, here we are. So, on the left we have the text. On the right we have the note. I opened that. I should not have. Okay. We want... Okay. Yeah, this is how it's set up. So, let's look at these. Okay. So right here is talking about the difference between... Okay. I don't know why I'm all the way back here. I wanted to just get into the notes that I took today because it was interesting. So let's go over there. I only took a couple of notes, but... Okay. So right now, he is talking about the creation of the angels. And he kind of is tackling the idea of God always being the Lord. And Lord meaning like master, I think. Something like that. So the question is that name... He actually gets into this in the Trinity. Is the name Lord, that which we apply to God, is that name always an accurate name, or is that a relational name? Well, okay, sorry. Actually, does God always have that title? And he says yes. But not in the same way that he is called Father, right? Because he is Father of the Son, Jesus, and in a co-eternal sense, not in a creation sense, right? He didn't make the Son. Instead, he generates the Son eternally. So the kind of relationship that the Father and Son have is a little bit different than the relationship that God has with the creature. Not a little bit, actually, really different. It's really different. So what that means is he's trying to understand how Lord is a relational term, right? Master is like the term. So that means, who are his servants? That's the question that we're kind of asking, right? And so what he's getting at is, the angels are his servants. Well, the servants, the angels haven't always existed, so that means that the Lord can't be called the Lord eternally, or always, not eternally, always, can't always have that title. So kind of his answer to that is that as long as time has existed, so have the angels. So when we say he has always been Lord, we really mean as long as time has existed, he has been known as Lord and has that proper title. So not in the eternal sense, but in the relationship of change. And what I mean by that is, time for Augustine is only the change only exists. Time only exists for changing creatures, right? So if you change, that means you go from one state to another. So that's kind of the understanding of what time is going from one state to another. So God does not go from one state to another, right? He instead is unchangeable, unchanging. So I don't know what I was getting at there. Sorry. So creatures, though, they exist in time, right? And in change. So I actually am a little bit confused as to where I was going with that. So let me go run through it again. So the understanding of time is important to this discussion because we're talking about the title of Lord. And okay, I don't know. I lost that. But anyway, let's actually go through the highlights that I have here. So what Augustine says is, I say, time was before these heavenly bodies, by some changing movement, whose parts succeeded one another, but could not exist simultaneously. And if there was such movement among the angels, which necessitated the existence of time, and that they from their very creation should be subject to these temporal changes, then they have existed in all time, for time came into being along with them. And who will say that what was in all time was not always? So, in essence, he's saying, as long as time has existed, angels have existed. And that, therefore, in all of time, God has been considered Lord in relationship to his creatures. Okay? And so, the name Lord is a name that is always applied to God in time. So, and he gets into that before creation there was no time, right? Because there is no change, because God is unchanging, and God is the only thing that exists if there is no creatures. So that means that time must come into existence at the same time that creatures come into existence. So in essence, he actually kind of gives a summary statement right here. For where there is no creature whose changing movements admit of succession, there cannot be time at all. Okay, that really kind of just wraps up that thought. And then he gets into the nature of God versus the creature. For he, God, has always existed in unchangeable eternity, while they were created, the angels, and are said to have been always because they have been in all time, time being impossible without the creature. So this is his understanding of time, is that in order for time to exist, there must be changing things. And God is not changing, only creatures are. So, therefore, time comes into being with the creature. So, what's really interesting about this is I am currently reading a book by William Lane Craig. It's called Time and Timelessness, God's Relationship with Time. And it is on the same subject, which is just funny. So when I was reading this morning, I was just recalling in my mind what I was reading yesterday about time and timelessness. And it was just really funny to see that Augustine actually dropped this argumentation earlier in the previous book, and now he's back to it, even though he kind of addressed all of this already. So it was kind of funny to see that what Augustine actually revisits is the same subject as what I'm reading in William Lane Craig. And that really shows me that this is an important aspect of understanding God's relationship with the creature. Right now I'm working on a large project that kind of gets into that. It's largely about predestination, but it all is connected, and I can see that even more clearly with how Augustine himself gets back into this discussion when talking about relationship of God with the creature, and that this the reading William Lane Craig is going to be worth it for the project that I'm going to be working on. And I'm not entirely sure how exactly it connects, but we'll see. I think that largely what time introduces into the equation is a contrast between the life of God, of an eternal being, versus the life of humans or creatures that live in time and do change and don't live in eternity. So there's a contrast between those two modes of existence. And so with that contrast in mind, you can understand better the idea of accountability in action. And what I mean by that is the question of how human beings can both do good and bad is an important question, right? And the question is, if God made human beings good, why do they desire to sin? That's a great question. Because if God makes everything good, why is there evil in the system? And some people might say, well, God caused it. God caused evil. But God is fully good, so the idea that God could cause evil is contradictory. So God can't cause the existence of moral evil. Okay, so then the question is, how does moral evil arise? And what Augustine says, and what I say, is that it arises from the individual. The moral agent actually is the origin of evil. They have the decision of being able to follow what is good, to seek what is good and desire it, or to desire what is less than. And so it's a misplacement of the good. So what I mean by that is there are various goods, and God made the world that way. And so but God himself is the highest good that we ought to seek. But what happens with wickedness and evil people is we desire what is less than the highest good. And we look at it as the highest good. And so when you do that, that introduces disorder, right? Because you're not properly ordering things. You're not properly ranking things. God is the highest, right? And what we ought to seek. And then if we put something else in the place of God, that means that we're automatically looking at the system wrong. And therefore, there's a defect in us at that point. And so, it's a defect brought on by our own design. And that's the only way that we can really think that evil can arise. Unless God is not good, which is just an absurdity. It's just contradictory. That being God means being good. So, that's kind of the answer of how evil arises. But then the question is, and this is the big question that I don't think anyone can answer, really. But it is a good question. And that is, why do free will agents desire to sin? Why do they misplace the good? And because it's like, what would compel them to do that? Not how could they do that, but why would they do that? What impetus would they have to choose what is less than ideal, right? Because if the good is apparent, God is clear in the initial state of, let's say, the angels or of Adam and Eve, right? We're talking about the origin of evil. We're not necessarily talking about why people choose to sin now. It's a little more clear because our understanding of the good, it has been we've been brought to a lower standing where we have a tough time discerning the good. And because of that, we're more inclined to misplace our affections and worship. So, we're talking about the initial state. Why do Adam and Eve decide to disobey God and to sin if they recognize God as the highest good? Okay, and this is where time comes into the equation. The thing is, we as finite creatures, we don't know everything all at once, right? So we actually are living through time. So what that means is that at every moment we are making new decisions, okay? We are choosing to relate to the world in a certain way. So then, because there's so many different ways that we relate, and we go through time in succession, like not everything happens all at once for us, that means that at every moment we don't necessarily have full knowledge of all things. And so what you need in order to have a misplacement of the good is a kind of obscurity in the mind of what is good, and an ability to desire what is less than. And time kind of introduces this factor of, again, at every moment you don't have necessarily perfect knowledge of all things. And so, but the question is that a necessary requirement of time? I don't know. But time seems to be really the only way that you can have that change of misplacing the good, right? Because if you didn't live in time, you would never really change your mind. So you would always see the good as it is in fullness. So that really is a factor that is important for trying to understand the relationship of human beings and evil and the world. I don't necessarily have an answer and a full understanding of that, but that's how that question applies to this topic and why it is important and why I've recognized that it's important and things that are worth exploring when thinking about evil and the rise of evil and predestination and all those things is understanding the difference between a unchanging eternal creator versus a changing creature. And so that's important for understanding predestination. Something that I just thought of right now is there's this idea. Let me backtrack a little bit to find my train of thought. Okay. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Okay, so this idea of the difference between human beings and God, creatures and the Creator, is important in understanding the two natures of Christ. Okay, so in Christ, you have the person, the Son, who is divine, and then he takes on a human nature along with that divinity. So the question then is, considering the difference between between God and the creature, how can he have both of those natures? They seem like they conflict. And the way that God Logic, who is an apologist, the way he talked about it in a debate he had, it was an informal debate, I'm pretty sure, with some Muslim guy. What he said is, it's not that you have something like a square circle, which is a self-contradiction, meaning you can't have a square and a circle because they just conflict in their definitions. So you can't have an object that literally is a square and a circle at the same time. That's just impossible. They're mutually exclusive ideas. Okay, so the Muslim said that that's the case when it comes to the human nature of Christ and divine nature of Christ, that it's akin to a square circle. It's a mutually exclusive combination. So what God Logic points out in that debate is, it's not that they're a mixture of those two, it's that they're side by side. So he's saying you have a square and a circle next to each other, not a square circle. He's saying they're joined together in one being, in one person. Being isn't quite the right term. Well, one being isn't the right term. One person. They're united in one person, not united in one being. They're united in one person. So what that means is that they're not. It's not that the natures mix. They are two separate natures, but they are next to each other, side by side. So it is still a good question, though, of like, well, if God is infinite and human beings are finite, what does that mean for Christ? What does that mean for the person that they're both apply to? That's a difficult question still, even if you can say you can have both next to each other without mixture. But how does that really work out practically? And I think to some degree this is answered by the creator-creature distinction. And what I mean by that is, if you think that God is the same as creatures, is just a better being than, or a highest being compared to every other being, then the idea that, sorry, I'm trying to think how to put this. Okay, that introduces a conflict in somebody's nature, because you just have somebody that's similar but that's bigger than you. So it seems like that would completely overwhelm the human nature, replace it. Whereas if we're looking at the nature of God versus the nature of man, the idea of eternity is a different quality of existence. It's not a different quantity of existence. It's a different quality. So it's not just that God's lived a really long time. It's that God is entirely different than the creation. He's entirely different. And so what that means is that you can actually have an overlap of God's existence and the existence of creatures. And what I mean by that is, when we say God is omnipresent, what we really mean by omnipresent is not that he is diffused throughout the creation. That's not really what we mean. We mean that the space that God occupies is infinite, and that he facilitates the existence of beings outside of himself. And so, let me maybe put it this way. So, the creation is, let's say, a three-dimensional space, okay? And then there's matter. Well, God is not material. He is spirit. Oh, I have an analogy, actually, that helps. So, we have body and soul. But where is our soul located? Is there another space that it occupies? No, but it is coincident with the creation, with our bodies. It is coincident with it. So, but the question still is, where is our soul? It's not in the material world, it's in the spiritual world. So the spiritual world is not like another dimension, another space, but is actually just entirely different. And I don't know exactly how to explain that, but I think we intuitively understand that our souls are not in the material world, and so we're not looking at another space, but we're looking at a different quality of existence, meaning our soul is not the same kind of thing as a material thing. Okay, and so because of that, they're not really conflicting, but they're coincident. And so if we look at it that way, we can see that God's omnipresence is not in a material sense, in a spatial sense, but actually he is beyond material and space, and therefore it is just an entirely different quality. And so because of that, they can be coincident in the same space, per se, if we want to put it that way, even because God is not actually present in a spatial way. So that's really tough exactly to pin down how exactly to really say that. But if that is the case, that means that when it comes to the quality of the divine nature, that can be coincident with this with a human nature at the same time applying to the same person, is kind of what God logic is getting at, is that they can be next to each other, even though they're not spatially, but that they apply to the same person. So what I'm getting at is, if God is temporal, living in the time and space, then that means that there is a conflict in the same space, because you would expect, well, actually, sometimes you come to a conclusion and you realize that you made a misstep. So, because the person that believes God is temporal, they believe that God is spiritual. So, the idea that he would occupy the same space in a spatial or material way is not accurate. So, that thought is not true. It's not true that there is that kind of nuance there. So So, anyway, that is still an interesting thing to think about, though. And, okay, this gets into a whole bunch of different subjects. But one subject that's interesting is the idea that the, what's it gonna get at? Oh. The idea of, is it Apollinarianism? Something like that? Basically, the idea that when we're looking at the divine and human natures, that the idea is that Christ has a divine soul, a divine spirit, but a human body. So, with this view, the idea is that when we talk about human souls, we talk about how we have a human mind, we have self-consciousness. So the idea would be that is the idea of Christ's mind and his soul and his consciousness are divine, and that he doesn't have a human consciousness and mind. Okay, so I don't remember which early church council kind of disputes this, but some council does. And ecumenical council of the undivided church, I mean, meaning before the church split. So there's this council that denies that and says that in order for Christ to be our Savior, he needs to take on himself our condition, a full human nature. He needs to take on a full human nature in order to heal the full human nature. And the way that it's phrased in some work, I don't remember what work it is what is not assumed, taken on, is not healed. So if Christ is not fully man, then he cannot fully redeem man. That's the idea. So he must have a human mind as well as human body. So the idea then is not that the divine nature takes over the human nature as far as the soul is concerned, the spirit, the mind and consciousness. And so you can actually see this in a certain way. If you think about the statement that Christ made, he says, no one knows the day or the hour of the end times, not even the Son, but the Father. So the question is, how is there any limited knowledge if Christ's mind is only a divine mind? How is there any confusion as to what the end times look like? Because if the Father and Son are identical in every way except for the Son being begotten of the Father, then the knowledge of Christ is not going to be divided, or it's not going to be different than the Father. So the question then is, in what sense does the Son not know? And I think the way that we need to understand it is that according to Christ's human nature, he does not know the day or the hour. Because otherwise you run into the concern of there being a division within the Trinity, division between the Father and Son. And that is a problem, because God's nature is not divided among the Trinity. Otherwise you get into partialism and a whole bunch of just heretical understanding there. And so you must say his knowledge is limited according to his human nature. You can only say that if he also has a human mind, right? If he only has a divine mind, you can't say that. But if he has a human mind, then you can say, according to his human nature, he does not know the day or the hour, okay, of the end times. Okay, so if you deny the initial premise that he has a human mind, then you run into some issues of actually interpreting the scripture. So there's three rules that Augustine establishes. Uh, like I said, Augustine covers so much, so I keep referring back to Augustine, but that's because he's just covered a lot of things. He has three rules to really interpret Scripture. So when it comes to the nature of Christ, or Christ as a person. So rule one is that there are passages that talk about Christ's human nature. So according to his human nature, there are statements that refer to his divine nature. So according to his divine nature, and then the third is things that refer to him as a person. And so let me give three examples just to demonstrate that. So let me put it this way. So let's look at the first one, the according to his human nature. So he, let's say, he died on the cross according to his human nature. Okay, because the divine cannot die. So he dies according to his human nature. So then we look at the question, different passages that talk about the divine nature. So let me think of one. As the Father has life in himself, so the Son has life in himself. So the Son has life in himself according to his divine nature. Aseity. Okay, and then we can look at person. So let's see. There are statements that Christ makes. So let's look at John 1. Let me see. No one has seen God, but the Son. Sorry. I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head. It says that no one has seen God, but God, the only begotten God, who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. Okay, so that is referring to begottenness of the Son from the Father, within God. So that is a passage that you look at according to personhood, not according to human nature. It's not that he is begotten God according to human nature. That doesn't even make any sense. Or that he is begotten. Sorry. I guess that does kind of apply to divine nature, but I think you get the point. There are passages that refer to his human nature in relationship to us, his divine nature in relationship, and then his. Sorry, let me say that again. You have passages that talk about his divine nature, quality of existence, and then you have passages that refer to his human nature, that quality of existence. And then you have things referring to his relationship to the Father as begotten from him. Okay. Begottenness is not a property of divinity. Otherwise, the Father is also begotten. So that passage actually does fit with what I'm getting at there. So yeah, I've kind of run out of things to talk about. This is a really fun discussion. I learned a lot from this one college class that I took at my sister's college, and we did 3 semesters and about doctrine, and one specific section was interesting, which is on the nature of Christ. And so that was actually a really interesting topic and class. And so a lot of this is me running through the same ideas from that class, which was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And so it's interesting seeing those different ideas come up again and coalesce. And I'm kind of building on what I've learned here and trying to put them together and make a coherent worldview. Or what I mean by that, it is coherent already. What I mean by that is taking what I've learned and trying to shape my understanding of an assortment of different topics, things that I might not necessarily fully understand the ramifications of. But anyway, this was fun. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you next time. Maybe on Saturday. Maybe next Saturday. So anyway, that's all I have for today. So,